The heroes of the Shin's Guard returned to a city erupting in celebration, a joyous reunion shattered only by the solemn procession of black coffins. At the victory banquet, amidst the cheers, Luo Chong dropped a bombshell, not of cannon fire, but of prophecy. He spoke of semi-automatic rifles and a monster called a machine gun, a weapon that spits bullets in an endless stream of rat-a-tat-tat. The promised land of new hardware arrived in a flash, and our transmigrated CEO dragged his top general to a live fire demonstration. They subjected the prototypes to a demonic torture test, burying them in sand, drowning them in water, and caking them in mud, only to watch them fire flawlessly. From pistols that could empty a clip in a blink to a machine gun that devoured ammo belts, Chu Bing's entire philosophy of war was dismantled and rebuilt in a single afternoon. And just when he thought he'd seen it all, Luo Chong casually invented a hand-cranked belt loader on the spot, before teasing weapons of godlike power, mortars and hand grenades that would turn battlefields into scorched earth. He emphasized, the key is that this thing fills the gaps in our fields of fire. A hand grenade, you can throw 50 meters at most. A mortar, you have to be at least 300 meters away to fire it. So what do you do about that 50 to 300 meter gap? You rely on this. The officers present listened with gleaming eyes, their minds already constructing a three-dimensional web of fire, using 3 different types of explosive weapons to turn the entire area from 0 to 3 kilometers into a death zone. And then there was the machine gun, like the Grim Reaper's scythe. Good heavens! In this world, who could possibly stand against the steel torrent of the Han tribe? Also, there's the autocannon, Luo Chong added after a moment's thought. It's a large-caliber machine gun, also fully automatic. But you lot won't need it for now. I'm planning on saving it for the Navy to mount on their ships, so don't even think about it. Oh right, one more thing. Luo Chong's tone shifted. When your leave rotation is over, I want all of you assigned to the various garrisons as instructors. Your job is to train those regional units into firearms experts. In the future, they will also be equipped with machine guns, standard Type 2 rifles, hand grenades, and mortars. Your mission is to teach them how to use all this new equipment, exactly as I've taught you. And also, your Shin's Guard will probably be expanded again next year or the year after. The specific plan isn't set yet, but just keep it in mind. Expanded. As soon as these words were out, the atmosphere on the scene instantly heated up. Expansion meant opportunities for promotion. Battalion commanders to commandants, platoon leaders to battalion commanders, squad leaders to platoon leaders. Everyone had a chance to move up a rung. Who wouldn't be excited? Just as the men were quietly discussing their bright future prospects, the gunfire from the range finally ceased. Little Lee came running over, reporting excitedly. Report to the chief. Commandant, the machine gun accuracy test is complete. All systems performed well, with no significant performance degradation. Luo Chong looked at Lin Fei, who also nodded at him, holding up the record book in his hand. Excellent. Luo Chong made the final decision. Since it has passed everything, let's give it a name and finalize it. We'll call it the Standard Type 4 General-Purpose Machine Gun. With the tests concluded, Lin Fei left with his men and the prototypes, which had been tormented beyond recognition, completely satisfied. The officers of the Shin's Guard, however, were a picture of dejection, watching with longing eyes as their dream guns were taken away. They looked as heartbroken as if their wives had just been stolen. Of course, Luo Chong, the big boss of the tribe, had no such reservations. He shamelessly liberated several guns and a large quantity of ammunition under the guise of personal collection, and then returned to Hanyang City with his guards, utterly content. As he neared his home, Luo Chong saw a group of artisans from a distance, clanging and banging away at something in the school square. Go and ask what they're up to, he said, pointing a guard in their direction. A short while later, the guard returned to report. Chief, it's Gu Chung from the Lakehart Island Research Institute. He says he's under your orders to build a large clock tower, so he's building a small-scale model here for verification first. He said it would be a waste to put the model in the institute, so he'd rather put it at the school and took it upon himself to build it here. Oh, Luo Chong suddenly understood. Wasn't this exactly what he loved to do himself? Build a model for verification first? It seemed this group of researchers had truly learned from the master. All right, tell him to do a good job and hurry it up. Luo Chong waved his hand and then dove into his study to deal with the mountain of official business that had piled up. The progress report on the Cross-Sea Bridge, the construction report for the new capital, the materials list for Qian Prefecture, the situation report for Heiyuan Prefecture in the north, the new courtyard in Tahai Prefecture in the south. Looking at the small mountain of reports before him, Luo Chong gave a wry smile. He wasn't some tribal chief. He was a general contractor. But he was long used to it. With a flourish of his pen, he reviewed, approved, and delegated authority, handling all matters in an orderly fashion. He was like a commander devising strategies from within his tent, only needing to assign tasks to the generals under him and then supervise their completion. The days passed one by one, and the date of the Great Southern Migration grew ever closer. Among the many projects, the one Luo Chong cared about most was the development of the southern coal mines. The cornerstones of industry are steel and coal. What he wanted to do most right now was to dig up the coal in the south as quickly as possible, turn it into coke, and then develop the nearby iron ore deposits to establish a new steel plant. As long as the South could become self-sufficient in steel, the entire tribe's development would once again take flight. And at this time, in Qian Prefecture, the members of the White House tribe who were working for the Han tribe were watching, with complex feelings, as tall buildings rose from the flat ground. They were happy because they received wages from the Han tribe, which allowed them to buy goods and even learn new skills. They were shocked by the Han tribe's seemingly bottomless financial and material resources. They provided food, paid wages, and had countless building materials and steel behemoths like trains. They even felt that any random artisan from the Han tribe was qualified enough to be the chief of their own White House tribe. The mood of the White House tribe had been on a roller coaster lately, soaring high one moment and plunging low the next. Watching the Han tribe pour more and more resources onto their land, building cities, paving roads, they couldn't help but feel a knot of unease in their stomachs. Why was the Han tribe investing so heavily? What were they after? It couldn't be for anything other than the black rocks buried beneath their feet. And when they thought of the northern slaves who had been herded over like cattle not long ago, the people of the White House tribe felt their own foundations tremble. They worried that once the city was built, they would be the next unfortunate souls sent down into the mines. However, just as their anxiety reached its peak, the rumbling steel behemoths on the construction sites unexpectedly reassured them. "You Fu, whether intentionally or not, let's slip a rumor. From now on, the Han tribe will use machines for mining." When the people of the White House tribe heard this, they mulled it over. It seemed to make sense. After all, those iron monsters were terrifyingly strong, and they didn't need to eat or sleep. As long as you fed them black rocks and water, they could work tirelessly. Their efficiency was greater than 100 strong men combined. The Han tribe wasn't stupid. How much grain would it take to feed 100 workers? And how much would it cost to maintain one machine? The math wasn't hard to do. And so, with a collective sigh of relief, the hearts of the White House tribe finally settled. And indeed, it was true. Under the great tide of the Industrial Revolution, the Han tribe's mining industry was undergoing a vigorous transformation. Any job that could be done by a machine would no longer be done by human hands. Yu Fu was a particularly devout believer in the cult of the machine. This time, in his letter to Luo Chong, he asked for 10 excavators, 2 road rollers, and as many dump trucks as he could get. He also reported some good news. A large limestone deposit had been discovered to the north. This meant that with Luo Chong's approval, a coking plant, a cement factory, and even a calcium carbide plant could be established on-site in the south. Luo Chong, naturally, gave his full support. His future southern industrial empire needed these basic industries to build its foundation. However, the ideal was grand, but reality was harsh. Those heavy construction machines didn't just grow on trees. Yu Ji at the palace and Zhu Ping at the cross-sea bridge were both craning their necks, waiting like hungry chicks for new equipment. The total production was limited, and deciding who got what became the biggest headache for general contractor Luo Chong. In the end, with a stroke of his pen, he prioritized the industrial construction in the south and the building of the new capital. As for the cross-sea bridge, let it crawl along at a snail's pace. That thing was a project for 100 years in the future anyway. A few years' delay wouldn't hurt. Just as Luo Chong was tearing his hair out coordinating the progress of various projects, a piece of news lifted his spirits. The wheat on the farms in Luoyang Prefecture to the east was ready for harvest. And, for the first time, they would be using grain harvesters. If this was a success, the agricultural level of the Han tribe would once again take a great leap forward. Luo Chong immediately decided that he must be present to witness this historic moment. 2 days later, the sky cleared after a rain. Luo Chong, along with a retinue of guards, rode towards Luoyang Prefecture. In the wheat fields beside the official road, golden waves of grain rippled in the wind. The air was filled with the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. In the farm's office area, Prefect Shi Xian had been waiting for some time. "Chief, the 5 grain harvesters are all ready. They're warming up now. Luo Chong swung himself off his horse and looked at the several large machines that were rumbling as they warmed up, nodding in satisfaction. The operators of these harvesters were the first batch of tractor drivers he had personally trained. Now, these old hands were about to take the wheel of new vehicles. They look good, Luo Chong said, walking towards a harvester while asking Xiexine, "Are the threshing grounds and warehouses ready? These harvesters of ours have a direct threshing function. Don't just focus on collecting the grain. I want the straw properly dried and stored as well. That's top-quality livestock feed. Chief, just you wait." Xiexine pounded his chest with a resounding thump. The moment the rain stopped, the men were on their feet, getting everything ready. "I even brought over a crew of able-bodied men from the county. The gear's all in place." He pointed to the rows of large water vats and piles of sand next to the warehouse, and then to a hulking, crude iron contraption. "The high-pressure water pump is on standby as well. I guarantee you, this tinderbox won't even see a spark." "It's not just the warehouse," Luo Chong said, his expression growing serious as his gaze swept over the endless waves of golden wheat. "These iron beasts running in the fields, they're the real mobile powder kegs. A single spark from a steam engine's boiler, and whoosh, our entire half-year's harvest goes up in one giant bonfire. You'll be too stunned to even cry." He paused, his tone leaving no room for argument. "So, I want everyone to be careful. Careful, and then more careful. Draw up a complete set of operating procedures for me. The support vehicles are not to leave their side, not for an inch. Clearing cinders, adding water, make it all snappy." "Yes, sir." Xiexine broke into a cold sweat the moment he heard the order. Holy cow, he thought. I was so focused on fireproofing the granary, I completely forgot about this. These unharvested wheat fields are a giant, dry tinderbox, and we've got 5 walking stoves running right next to them. The risk is immense. Luo Chong's warning was a lifesaver. Not daring to delay, Xiexine began shouting out arrangements. Soon, several tractors came chugging over, transforming into fire prevention and logistics support vehicles. Some had their beds lined with thick, damp sand, ready to eat, the scorching cinders spat out by the harvesters. Others hauled an entire tanker of water, like mobile wells, prepared to feed the harvesters at a moment's notice and snuff out any audacious sparks at their inception. Fortunately, the recent rain had left the field ridges and soil still moist, and a fresh, earthy scent hung in the air, lowering the risk of fire to its absolute minimum. After a tense period of preparation, the 5 steel behemoths were finally ready. Hoo-hoo! A driver yanked hard on the steam whistle, its piercing shriek tearing through the tranquility of the fields. He skillfully pushed a lever, and with a loud clang, the massive steel drum at the front of the machine, driven by hydraulics, began to spin with a ferocious whir. When it reached peak velocity, the driver shoved another lever, and the massive machine began to lumber forward with heavy steps. "Let's go!" With a shout from the driver, the harvester plunged into the golden waves of wheat like a famished beast. The display was one of sheer, awesome power. The steel cage at the front acted like a giant comb, its long iron bars ruthlessly pressing down the wheat stalks, flattening them into neat rows. Then, with a metallic whir, the blade spinning just above the ground flashed with cold light, and the wheat stalks were severed in an instant. The cut stalks were immediately rolled into the harvester's gaping maw by the steel rollers at its front. A muffled clank, clank, clank rumbled from within the machine, like the sound of chewing. Crushing, threshing, winnowing. The process was a seamless flow. Whoosh! Golden grains of wheat poured from the discharge chute on the side of the machine like a stream from an open sluice gate, flowing directly into a grain trailer hitched alongside. And the rear of the machine wasn't idle, either. The straw was automatically compressed and bundled inside. When a bundle reached a certain size, it was ejected with a thwump, landing forlornly on the barren field. Chug 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 chug. Grayish-white smoke and steam puffed from the harvester's smokestack like the breath of a behemoth as it pushed relentlessly forward. It greedily devoured the wheat field before it, leaving behind a stubbled landscape and deep tire tracks. Standing on the ridge, Xiexine was utterly dumbfounded, his mouth agape enough to fit an egg. "Good heavens," he muttered, his face a mask of disbelief. "I remember back when we first joined the Han tribe, we had to harvest wheat bare-chested, wearing a tattered straw hat, with nothing but a worn-out sickle in our hands. You'd grab a handful with your left hand and swish with your right. You could work yourself to death for a whole day and not even clear a patch of land the size of your palm. And that wasn't the end of it," he said, growing more animated. "After cutting it, you had to dry it. After drying it, you had to haul it to the threshing ground. Stone rollers, donkeys, wheelbarrows. You used every tool at your disposal. a constant battle to save every last grain. You'd be so worried about dropping a single one that you'd lose your appetite for days. But look at this now. He pointed a trembling finger at the steel behemoth dominating the field. This thing is a goddamn miracle. It clears a path 8 meters wide in one go. Cutting and threshing, all automatic. My God, how many strong men would it take to break their backs doing this much work? Shi Xian's heartfelt exclamation struck a chord with everyone around, who nodded in deep agreement. Indeed, who among them hadn't experienced the back-breaking labor of farming? Without these steel beasts, the spectacular scene before them was something they wouldn't have dared to dream of. Luo Chong, however, was calm. He hadn't spent much time working the fields himself, but he had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. He clapped Shi Xian on the shoulder and smiled. See the power of machinery now? The investment was worth it. But you all must remember, the real investment isn't in buying these lumps of iron, but in strengthening our investment in basic education. You need to understand what allows us to build these things. It's the sharp, resourceful people in the research institute. And where do these people come from? They are molded, step by step, in our schools. I want you to go all in on basic education. Only then will the tribe's talent pool be like a field of leeks, growing back as fast as you can harvest them. With people, we can create even more amazing things, and everyone can live a better life. Luo Chong's voice was firm and powerful. Once this wheat is harvested, you must personally oversee the autumn school enrollment. Go door to door and check. Every single school-age child, I don't want a single one missed. Send them all to school. If the schools aren't big enough, then expand them. If you take the people's taxes, you must give the people's children a bright future. If any family is struggling and can't afford tuition, have the officials visit them. Solve the problem. No child should be barred from the gates of knowledge because of poverty. These words of great vision fired up the junior officials around him. One by one, they took out their notebooks, the tips of their pens scratching furiously across the paper as if to carve the chief's every word into their minds. Luo Chong pointed to a guard who was writing the fastest. Later, compile these points on education into a formal document. Draft a decree for me. I'll approve it and have it distributed to every county and prefecture. Sir. The guard snapped to attention, acknowledging the order gravely. Listening from the side, Shi Xian felt as if he had been enlightened. Look at the chief's vision. He thought, here I am, marveling at how incredible the harvester is, and the chief is already seeing the logic behind the incredible. So the root of the Han tribe's strength lies in those small, unassuming schoolhouses. Half an hour later, seeing that the harvesting operation was proceeding smoothly and without any hitches, Luo Chong and his retinue made their way to the grain-drying ground. The scene before them was even more stunning than the mechanical harvest. The vast concrete yard was covered with a glittering layer of golden wheat, a veritable ocean of gold that shimmered so brightly in the sunlight, it was hard to keep one's eyes open. This scene of such lavish abundance was enough to bring tears to the eyes of anyone who had ever known hunger. An official from the Ministry of Agriculture trotted over and bowed. Chief, we've done a preliminary calculation. The yield per acre for mechanically farmed land is about 15% lower than for manually cultivated land, and it's extremely hard on the soil's fertility. This year, should we plant a third crop on this land? Luo Chong showed no surprise at the news, merely smiling leisurely. How can mechanical fertilizer spreaders be as steady as an old farmer's hand? A lower yield isn't surprising, but you're not looking at the books correctly. He scooped up a handful of wheat, the golden kernels slipping through his fingers. You should think of it this way. If no one had reclaimed this land, it would still be wasteland, with a yield of 0. Now that we've cultivated it with machines, whatever we harvest is pure profit. So tell me, are we at a loss, or have we gained? The realization dawned on everyone. Of course, it was all surplus. As for the soil's fertility, Luo Chong waved his hand. If the land is tired, let it rest. And feed it something good. Let it lie fallow for half a month, then load it up with fertilizer, and while the weather is still warm, plant a round of soybeans. Let the soil rejuvenate itself. That way, next year, we can keep this momentum going. Planting soybeans to enrich the soil was already common knowledge among the old farmers. The chief's words not only solved the immediate problem, but also laid out a long-term plan, leaving his audience thoroughly convinced. Just as Luo Chong finished his inspection of the drying ground and was about to head back, Shi Xian sidled up to him mysteriously. Chief, there's been new progress at the brewery. Would you like to go and see for yourself? Oh, Luo Chong's interest was piqued. What kind of progress? Chief, the foundations for the brewery are all done. The concrete floor was laid smooth as glass, and it's gleaming. The drainage system is in, 2 massive factory buildings are up, and those tech heads from the research institute are already holed up inside, hammering out the designs for the production line. When Xian gave a report, his enthusiasm was so great that he practically sprayed a fine mist with every word. And that thing you mentioned before, what was it? Glass bottle filling and press-on crimp caps. Hey, guess what? I hear they've already figured it out. Oh, they've built the capper and the filling line. Luo Chong's eyes lit up instantly. My God, he thought. That means beer in glass bottles. Ice cold, frothy, the kind of liquid happiness that sends a chill straight to your brain with the first gulp. Ever since I crossed over to this savage, Coke-less era, I've been dreaming of this. He had to see it. So, Chief, when do we head out? Xian pressed. Luo Chong glanced at the sky. The sun was already starting its descent. It had to be past 4 in the afternoon. Even if they rode flat out, it would be dusk by the time they arrived. They wouldn't be able to see a thing. Not today, he said with a wave of his hand. We'll stay at your official residence for the night. We'll go tomorrow after a good meal. You got it. I'll make the arrangements right away. Xian replied with an eager nod and a bow. There was still some time before dark. On a whim, Luo Chong declared, Come on, let's take a stroll over to the farm's livestock pens. At the pens, everything was proceeding as planned. The new breed of beef cattle that Luo Chong had been dreaming of were still tucked away safely in their mother's wombs. The cows were round-bellied and walked with a steady, stable gait. At this rate, it didn't look like any calves would be born this year. A few old herdsmen brought over from the grasslands were tending to these mothers-to-be as if they were royalty. The pigsty, on the other hand, was a scene of peaceful bliss. The castrated pig experiment Luo Chong had initiated earlier was a resounding success. The group of boars, stripped of their porcine ambitions, were a full size larger than their virile counterparts from the same litter. It proved Luo Chong's theory absolutely correct. Castrated pigs were fantastically lazy, with nothing on their minds but eating and sleeping. They didn't fight, they didn't chase sows, and they weren't troubled by matters of the heart. They devoted themselves single-mindedly to packing on the pounds, and their growth rate was skyrocketing. Of course, these portly layabouts weren't ready for market yet. They still had to continue their service to science by providing valuable data for the breeding program. The remaining flock of sheep were the most stable employees on the farm. Their main job was to dispose of the vast amount of straw left over after the harvest, producing a bit of natural organic fertilizer in the process and achieving a perfect ecological cycle. After a long tour of the livestock farm, the sky began to dim. Luo Chong was in high spirits and made a decision on the spot. Buy a few sheep and take them to the official residence. We're having a feast for the men tonight. Although the men were not usually short on meat, this was a treat from the chief himself, which gave it a special significance. A cheer went up, and mouths began to water in anticipation. The next morning, well-fed and rested, the group set off in a grand procession toward the brewery on the north side of the city. An hour later, when the gray-white cluster of buildings came into view in the distance, Luo Chong gave the order. Everyone dismount. We'll enter on foot. The newly laid concrete was smooth and flat. Horse hooves would clatter loudly on it and cause significant wear. A good man looks after his horse. The first impression upon entering the factory grounds was one of vastness. 2 tall factory buildings stood alone on the wide-open concrete expanse. They hadn't even had time to build a surrounding wall or a main gate yet. Aside from a few tractors parked in a corner, there was nothing else, making the place feel a bit bare. Some of the construction workers and researchers on site saw Luo Chong's party and stopped what they were doing to wave from a distance. Luo Chong walked into one of the buildings. The space was cavernous, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Only in a corner near the entrance were there a few machines painted a faded green, looking as if they had seen better days. Where's the bottle capper? Luo Chong asked, getting straight to the point. Show me. This way, Chief. Xian scurried ahead, pointing to the machines in the corner as if he were presenting a priceless treasure. This is it. I saw it once before. My God, it's incredible. Luo Chong walked closer and immediately understood the situation. These few pressing machines were old, clearly relics decommissioned from some other factory. However, some of the key components on them gleamed with the luster of new metal, obvious later additions. Modified from old machinery. Frugal and resourceful. Not bad. Look, Chief. Xian began his presentation, gesturing wildly. This is the capper. I hear it's just a prototype, but it can already take a piece of sheet metal, wham, punch it into a cap, then insert the white rubber ring, and finally, click, clamp it tightly onto the bottle's mouth. They say they lost a lot of hair trying to figure this one out. Luo Chong circled the machine twice, merely nodding from time to time without a word. Only when Xian had talked himself hoarse did he finally speak. Is the person in charge of this machine here? Call him over. I want him to explain it to me. Seriously, what does an administrator like you know about mechanics? Luo Chong had always believed that professional matters should be handled by professionals. What he needed to know was, does this machine actually work? When can it be mass-produced? What technical bottlenecks have they encountered? And can I help? Gently rebuffed, Xian sheepishly went to find the right person. Soon, a researcher who still looked a bit green was pushed forward. Although he was just a junior member of the project team, he knew every detail of the capping machine inside and out. Chief, the young researcher was a little nervous, but as soon as he began talking about his work, his eyes lit up. We modified this from two old-style pressing machines. One is for punching the blanks, and the other is for pressing them into caps while using heat bonding to attach the sealing gasket. He picked up a glass bottle that had already been sealed and handed it to Luo Chong. Finally, we use this crimping machine to tighten the cap onto the neck. You can check it, Chief. We've tested it ourselves, and the seal is perfect. It's just, we haven't tested it with actual beer yet. We don't know if the carbonation will have any effect. Luo Chong nodded and asked, did you run into any major problems during development? Is this the final design? This is just a prototype. The official production line will definitely use new machines, and I hear they'll use a lot of copper-plated parts, the young researcher answered honestly. As for problems, stamping the caps wasn't difficult. It was the final step, crimping the cap onto the bottle, that gave us a huge headache. Oh, Luo Chong's interest was piqued. Were the bottles not strong enough? That's exactly it, Chief, the researcher exclaimed with a look of hero worship. The bottle quality was poor. The first batch of bottles from the glassworks was too thin. The moment we put them on the machine, pop, the neck would shatter. We reported the problem, and they made a new, thicker batch, which finally solved it. After learning about the capper, Luo Chong looked around the empty workshop and asked, and the filling line and fermentation equipment, what's the progress on that? At this question, the young researcher's expression suddenly turned strange. He hesitated for a long time before stammering. I'm not too clear on that. It's just, I hear they argue all day, and some people are saying your requirements are too difficult, Chief. That spending so many resources just to make beer is a bit not worth it. Oh, Luo Chong raised an eyebrow. What are they arguing about? Are my requirements that hard to meet? The young researcher threw caution to the wind. Yes, Chief, they are. You require that all equipment and parts that come into contact with the raw materials must be surface-plated with copper. But how are we supposed to plate something like that? He gestured with his hands. Take the fermentation tank, for example. I hear it's going to be as big as a ship. Our current chemical plating process is basically just boiling the parts in a chemical solution. My God, to copper plate a ship, how big of a pot would you need? Besides, the copper plating isn't durable. It'll wear off in no time. So someone suggested we just build the entire production line out of a bronze alloy. But where would we get that much copper? As if a dam had broken, the young researcher started pouring out his grievances. The front lines are going through machine gun bullet casings like water. The mint is waiting for copper to make coins. Our entire copper output has already been carved up. There's simply no copper left to build this beer production line. Listening to his complaints, Luo Chong wasn't angry. Instead, he frowned. He had been too simplistic in his thinking. Chemical plating worked for small parts, but for a fermentation tank the size of a ship, it was indeed pure fantasy. He pondered for a moment, and a flash of inspiration struck. All right, he said to the young researcher. Go back and tell them to put the copper plating and bronze alloy plans on hold for now. I'll have the main research institute see if they can develop a new type of corrosion-resistant steel. In that instant, a gleaming name surfaced in his mind, stainless steel. When it came to copper mines, the Han tribe was actually sitting on a decent supply. Nearby, there was 8 Treasures Mountain in Luoyang County, the tribe's personal copper piggy bank. Farther out, on a sandbar in the middle reaches of the Luoyang River, the same place where they had discovered the Li tribe, another mine lay hidden. But it was too remote, and they hadn't had the time to exploit it. Further north, in Yuye's territory, there was another. They had mined it for a while, but then, for some reason no one could fathom, the chief had shut it down. And in the far south, on Xiongzhou Island, sat a massive copper mine that the Xian tribe had been nibbling at for years. Now that the Han tribe had taken over, they were only mining it symbolically, barely scratching the surface. All things considered, the only truly stable supply came from a single source, 8 Treasures Mountain. But that single source had to feed all the tribe's copper-hungry tigers. The biggest expenses were printing money, that is, minting copper coins, and the newly crowned king of copper consumption, weapons and ammunition. The moment a machine gun opened up on the front lines, brass casings rained down. Even with reloading programs and a desperate effort to recycle the shells, could they dare skimp on the strategic reserve of something so vital? Not to mention the copper-jacketed bullets themselves. Once fired, they were gone for good. Where were you going to find them again? Then there were all the miscellaneous copper parts on various machines. They might not have looked like much individually, but the demand was huge. And in this tight spot, they wanted to build an entire industrial production line out of solid bronze? My God, they'd have to hollow out the whole of 8 Treasures Mountain for that. Luo Chong didn't even dare to think about what would happen when the age of electricity arrived. The sheer amount of copper wire needed to crisscross the land would probably skyrocket, multiplying more than tenfold. Cutting costs and finding new sources was a matter of extreme urgency. Issuing paper currency, recalling copper coins, opening new mines, those were all plans for the future. Right now, he had to clean up the mess at the brewery. His initial proposal of copper plating was mainly to prevent rust. It was a matter of common sense. This was equipment for food and drink. You couldn't just paint the inside. A regular iron tank, soaking in a liquid like beer day in and day out, would start reeking of rust within a few days. But now, with copper in short supply, that path was blocked. He had to find another way. Ultimately, the best material for food industry production equipment wasn't copper at all, but stainless steel. That stuff was as chemically stable as a rock, practically born for the food and beverage industry. Stainless steel was just a common name. Its scientific name was acid-resistant steel. There were hundreds, even thousands, of varieties, but they all followed the same basic principle, adding a certain proportion of another metal, chromium, to ordinary carbon steel. It was like giving the steel a suit of impervious armor, making it resistant to corrosion and contamination. The problem was, chromium was a bit reclusive in nature. It didn't like to appear alone, preferring to mix with other elements in or known as chromite, which made mineral prospecting a hellish task. But no matter how hard it was, it had to be done. Luo Chong's food industry empire was still just a blueprint. He couldn't let a raw material bottleneck choke him at the starting line over a single brewery. If word of this got out, where would he, the chief, hide his face? Let's do it. Luo Chong slapped his thigh, his mind made up. He first locked himself in a room, sketching and drawing for a whole day. Then, with a stack of drafts in hand, he marched straight to the Research Institute in Xin'an County and rounded up the 2 top tech gurus, Li and Lin Fei. Chief, Lin Fei greeted with a bow as he entered. Luo Chong waved him off and got straight to the point. I've heard about the brewery situation. The tanks aren't big enough, and there's not enough copper, right? Lin Fei's old face flushed, and he nodded. Yes, everyone's been tearing their hair out over it. But yesterday, I heard from the young man working on the capper that you're planning to develop a new type of steel. Of course, Luo Chong's tone was firm. You two know more about metal than anyone else in the tribe. You should understand that so-called steel is just an alloy of iron. He guided them patiently. We add carbon to iron, and we get sharp carbon steel. We add molybdenum, and we get heat-resistant molybdenum steel. So, tell me, if we add something else, couldn't we get a type of steel that never rusts? I've even come up with a name for it. We'll call it stainless steel. Stainless steel? Li and Lin Fei's eyes lit up. My God, if they could really create this, think of how many persistent problems it would solve. This would be nothing short of a revolution in the industrial field. But, what do you add to iron to make it rust-proof? That was the core of the problem. Seeing the constipated looks on their faces, Luo Chong smiled. Like a patient mentor, he continued. It's okay if you can't figure it out right away. We can cast a wide net, hold a metal addition. Even if we don't end up with stainless steel, what if we stumble upon some other treasure by accident? That's still a huge win. Just because we don't have a use for it today doesn't mean we won't tomorrow, right? The 2 men nodded repeatedly, thinking the chief's logic was impeccable. I have a feeling, Luo Chong lowered his voice, feigning mystery, that this new metal is also hidden in some iron ore, just like manganese. What we need to do now is turn every single iron mine upside down. So, where do we start looking? Li was still a bit lost. We start right under our feet. Luo Chong pointed to the ground. Not just the mines we're currently digging, but also the ones we've discovered but haven't started mining yet, and even the slag left over from your iron smelting. Can you guarantee there's no treasure hidden in there? These words struck Li and Lin Fei like a bolt of lightning, a sudden, profound enlightenment. Of course, the slag. They were usually too busy with smelting to pay any attention to that dark, crumbly stuff. Most of it was just hauled off to pave roads. What if there really was a metal with a higher melting point than iron? It would have been left behind in the slag. After a hurried consultation, A top-level directive from the chief swept like a blizzard across every corner of the Han tribe. The order was simple: dig. Dig up samples from every known iron mine in the territory, whether it was being actively mined or not. Even from the same mine, samples were to be taken from multiple locations. Then, they were all to be sent to the Lake Hart Island Research Institute in Luo County for a sacred ritual known as assaying. In an instant, a massive treasure hunt swept across the entire Han tribe. The Shu got iron ore from the Tang tribe's territory and sent it over on the fastest flying fish boats. Yufu also sent men to chip away at the hematite mine near the Baiwu tribe's territory, clearly marking the excavation sites. And in Xing'an County, De Li and Lin Fei, being closest to the action, took the chemical team that had previously worked on molybdenum steel and plunged headfirst into the mountain of slag, beginning a frantic gold rush. As for the brewery, the design blueprints continued, the factory buildings continued to rise, and everything proceeded as usual. They were just waiting for the grand debut of stainless steel to upgrade their equipment in one fell swoop, going from a pea shooter to a cannon. As it turned out, brute force had worked a miracle. After more than half a month of turning things upside down, just as Luo Chong was about to personally inspect every last piece of slag in Xing'an County, an unexpected piece of news arrived from the mint on Lake Hart Island. They had long ago discovered a type of strange rock that simply wouldn't melt, no matter how intensely they heated it. When Luo Chong received the news, he could have kicked himself. After all that, the chromium he had been searching for was right under his nose the whole time, mixed in with the lead ore. It seemed that Supermine in Xing'an County wasn't just a magnetite mine. It was also a lead and silver mine, and now, a chromium mine had appeared out of nowhere. This wasn't a mountain, it was a mineral buffet. It turned out that the mint's lead smelting furnace, due to its heavy pollution, had been banished by Luo Chong to the depths of the swamp, making it something of a secret base. Lead's melting point is only a few hundred degrees Celsius, but chromium was a tough nut to crack, with a melting point of over 1,800 degrees, even more heat-resistant than iron. So, every time they smelted lead, the molten metal would flow out, while the accompanying chromium ore remained completely unfazed and was simply discharged as slag. The workers at the mint were long used to this. They just thought the material was incredibly hard and figured it was iron ore that had been accidentally mixed in during mining, so they casually tossed it aside. It wasn't until Luo Chong's treasure hunt decree spread throughout the tribe that it finally dawned on them. Holy crap, that new metal the chief is looking for. Isn't that the stuff we throw away every day? And so, they had hurriedly reported it. At this point, there was no sense in assigning blame. All Luo Chong wanted was to get this stainless steel made as quickly as possible. He had no desire for the brewery to still be under construction by the time he was off on his southern excursion. Quick, get a sample from the mint. At Luo Chong's command, a guard galloped off. The sample was split in two. One half was rushed to the main research institute on Lake Hart Island for them to begin assaying immediately. The other was sent directly to Xing'an County, so De Li and his team could use it as a reference to locate the corresponding ore in the lead mining area. Back in Xing'an County, the tech heads on the brewery project team went wild when they heard that the magical material capable of making steel invincible was right next door. Roaring as if they'd been shot with adrenaline, they charged into the mining district. Armed with the chromium or sample, they compared it against previously excavated areas and quickly pinpointed a high-yield deposit. Excavate. Stockpile. Once they had gathered enough for a full furnace load, De Li fired up a blast furnace. He remembered the chief's instructions that this new or required intense heat, so he had 2 additional sets of hot blast stoves and steam-powered blowers installed, getting the fire roaring. Clang, clang. The ore was ground into powder, mixed with coke, and fed into the blazing inferno of the blast furnace. Soon, the molten lead, with its lower melting point, was drained off first. Then, the furnace temperature continued to climb. After several rounds of feeding and slag removal, and with the encouragement of the whooshing blowers, the first batch of silvery white molten chromium finally gushed out, cast into gleaming chromium ingots. At the same time, the assay results from the Research Institute arrived. The metal was chemically stable, resistant to oxidation and corrosion, heat-resistant, and extremely hard. Their recommendation: attempt to use it for making lathe tools, as it might perform even better than molybdenum steel. It was confirmed. Luo Chong's prophecy had once again come true. Let's do it. Smelt the stainless steel. Following the golden recipe provided by Luo Chong, 15% chromium, 5% molybdenum, and the rest carbon steel, the steel mill under De Li's command quickly churned out the first batch of stainless steel. However, When it first came out of the furnace, it was a dull, grayish color, a far cry from the blindingly bright, mirror-like stainless steel Luo Chong remembered. Until a steel plate was placed on a grinding wheel. Screech. With a piercing shriek of friction and a shower of sparks, the dull outer layer was ground away, revealing a dazzling brilliance beneath. Whoa! Delee's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he stared at the plate, which was so bright it could be used as a mirror. My God, this thing is shinier than a bronze mirror. If we didn't already have glass mirrors, we could make a fortune selling this stuff as looking glasses. Luo Chong nodded in satisfaction. More importantly, its applications in the food industry are limitless. He clapped Delee on the shoulder. Set up a dedicated furnace just for making stainless steel. The brewery is only the beginning. After that, there will be canning factories, beverage plants. Even if we can't use it all right away, making things like mugs, lunchboxes, wash basins, and kitchen knives will sell like hotcakes. Lin Fei sidled up, asking excitedly. Chief, with steel this good, can we use it for weapons? If our guns and cannons don't rust, imagine how much our combat effectiveness will increase. Not for firearms, Luo Chong considered for a moment. But using it for cannons is a good idea. We haven't started trial producing our mortars yet, have we? Let's make them with stainless steel and increase the proportion of both chromium and molybdenum to 15%. Lin Fei, while you're at it, develop a seamless steel tube rolling mill. It'll save us from having to slowly machine them, which is far too wasteful. Remember, performance comes first. When it came to weapons, Luo Chong's expression grew serious. There's something else I need to give you a heads up about, he said, lowering his voice. I'm planning to have the Research Institute develop a new type of explosive called picric acid. This stuff is incredibly powerful, highly corrosive, burns at a temperature twice the melting point of steel, and it can't be extinguished by water. Delee and Lin Fei sucked in a sharp breath. Holy hell, that wasn't an explosive, it was a flame from hell itself. If you packed that into an artillery shell, it wouldn't just destroy an iron house. It would melt a solid block of iron into a puddle. Therefore, Luo Chong's gaze became incredibly sharp. All research and development of explosive weapons will be moved to Lake Heart Island. I'll assign you 3 islands. 1 for research, 1 for building the factory, and 1 as a testing ground. There can be absolutely no mistakes with this. Otherwise, your entire research institute might just, whoosh, ascend to heaven together. It's a strange twist of fate, really. This picric acid started its life as a common yellow dye in the textile industry, having absolutely nothing to do with death and destruction. Who would have thought that once the substance crossed over into the military field, it would transform into a demon of war? Back in the day, the Japanese Empire used stolen technology to create their Shurimo's powder, which made a spectacular, no, a sinister, splash in the First Sino-Japanese War. The shells packed with that explosive, even without a direct hit, would erupt in 3,000-degree flames that could make an ironclad battleship scream. This fire, even when it fell into the sea, couldn't be extinguished. It was like a cancer clinging to the bone. Its power was terrifying. Of course, Luo Chong was only developing this substance now because his hand was forced. The Han tribe had simply gone down the wrong branch of the tech tree. Without ammonia synthesis technology, they couldn't produce high-end explosives like TNT. Its main ingredient, toluene, had to be refined from petroleum, and the Han tribe had yet to see even a shadow of an oil field. But picric acid was different. Its core ingredient, phenol, could be distilled from coal tar. And coal, the Han tribe had as much of that as they wanted. Coke refineries and distillation technology were also readily available. When it came to a supply of raw materials, they were more than secure. The moment Luo Chong's order was given, the entire Han tribe cranked into motion like a giant, tightly wound machine. In Xing'an County's steel mill, no sooner had Luo Chong left than Delee summoned the construction team. Within the original factory grounds, they began erecting a brand new blast furnace, dedicated solely to smelting stainless steel. This new furnace was a true steel behemoth. It was 4 times the size of the old furnaces and was the Han tribe's first true steel shell blast furnace. Its outer shell was riveted together from thick steel plates, its internal skeleton supported by angle iron, and then lined with thick firebricks. This would have been unthinkable in the past. Back then, forget building a furnace this big. Just gathering enough ore and coke for a single batch required mobilizing the entire tribe's labor force for a whole season. Over a full year, they could only manage about 4 smelts of molten iron. Steel was an even rarer commodity. But things were different now. Mining used to be done with shovels. Now they had excavators. Transporting or used to rely on ox carts, a single trip over the mountains yielding less than a ton. And now, a single hydraulic dump truck could move a fortune in ore. Even better, dedicated trains delivered all the ore and coke they could possibly need. Their logistical capabilities had undergone a revolutionary upgrade. The construction of the new blast furnace wasn't just to meet current demand. It was to serve as a model project for future industrial development in the South. At the same time, a site selection expeditionary team, composed of imperial guards, county officials, and tech experts from the two major research institutes, took a boat deep into the Great Eastern Marsh to find a secluded Devil's Island for the picric acid project. After 4 days of surveying, they finally selected 3 uninhabited, deserted islands. One for research, one for the factory, and the last one as a testing ground. Secretive, secure, and completely isolated, it was the perfect location, tailor-made for such a dangerous substance. Instantly, trains loaded with building materials began running day and night from Xing'an County to the docks at Weishan County, where fleets of ships would then transport them to Lake Hart Island. Artisans toiled under the sun, and mysterious buildings began to rise from the desolate islands. Meanwhile, at the brewery, now empowered by the divine weapon of stainless steel, the previously stalled production line manufacturing finally shifted into high gear. Lin Fei and his team of techies entered overdrive mode. Massive mash tuns, rows of fermentation tanks, an automated glass bottle filling line, a precision capping machine. Except for a few auxiliary components, every single part that came into direct contact with the beer was made of gleaming stainless steel. The glass factory wasn't idle either. A brand new automated bottle-blowing production line was being installed. While it didn't require high-grade stainless steel, the hundreds of standardized metal molds and the large number of air compressors were enough to completely transform the entire factory. Luo Chong, meanwhile, sat calmly in his study like a master strategist, constantly monitoring the progress on all fronts through the intelligence reports brought back by his guards. At the same time, he was actively preparing for an even bigger event, moving his entire administration south. The chief's southern migration signified that the Han tribe's strategic focus would shift from the long-managed north to the populous, resource-rich, but largely undeveloped south. And to kickstart this great southern development, steel was undoubtedly the top priority. The first problem facing Luo Chong was transportation. The iron and coal mines in the south were separated by continuous mountain ranges. Building a railway would require digging tunnels and erecting bridges, a massive undertaking that would take at least 3 to 4 years to complete. Therefore, he had to turn his attention to the hematite mine near the Baiwu tribe. And to peacefully mine and build factories there, he had to win over the local indigenous people, make them a part of the Han tribe. This was the only solution Luo Chong offered. Annihilation or expulsion. That wasn't his style. Peaceful absorption and mutual benefit was the true path of a king. To ensure the smooth implementation of the Southern Migration Plan, a large-scale talent reserve movement was quietly launched in the factories across the north. One post, many people, the old teach the new. A master craftsman would take on 2 or 3 young apprentices, teaching them personally. Before long, these newcomers could stand on their own. When the southern factories were built, they could take half the workforce with them and start production immediately. This was not just a strategic relocation. It was a top-down reshuffling and an opportunity for promotion for everyone. The key personnel transferred to the south would become the managers and engineers of the new factories. The veterans who remained in the north would fill the vacancies and receive promotions. The entire Han tribe thrummed with an unprecedented vitality and anticipation because of this southern migration plan. And so, a universally welcome wave of promotions and raises was about to sweep across the entire Han tribe. In the northern factories, veteran workers were promoted to leadership positions, and apprentices officially became full-fledged employees. The southern factories had not even been built, yet the future positions of factory managers and engineers were already reserved. The military was practically salivating at the prospect. The Divine Strategy Guard was getting new weapons and was on the verge of expansion. A collective promotion for all officers was practically a done deal. Even the political system was in for a major reshuffle. When Luo Chong arrived in the south, he would certainly establish a new capital. At that time, his group of experienced and well-coordinated county governors would all be transferred to the central government to become high-ranking court officials. The vacancies they left behind would naturally be filled by those below them. Deputies would become chiefs, clerks would become officials. It was a seamless, perfectly orchestrated chain of events. Of course, the foundation of this grand blueprint still rested on those few factories that were under frantic construction: the steel mill, the coking plant, and their supporting coal mines and railways. with Luo Chong personally overseeing operations from the north and coordinating everything. Progress on all projects shot forward with astonishing speed. The first victory report came from the dedicated stainless steel blast furnace in Xin'an County. Once this steel behemoth went into production, it began churning out gleaming stainless steel and special molybdenum steel day and night, providing a continuous supply of vital materials for the downstream industries. With ample raw materials, Lin Phase Power Research Institute also shifted into mass production. The first batch of 5,000 knockoff Type 56 semi-automatic rifles, officially designated the Standard Type 3 rifle, was fresh off the line. These rifles would be prioritized for Luo Chong's personal guard units, the Divine Strategy Guard and the Golden Guardian Guard. Next, 250 general-purpose machine guns were also delivered, likewise exclusively for the Divine Strategy Guard. Finally, there were 3,000 improved bolt-action rifles, which Luo Chong planned to hold onto and hand out as welcome gifts to whichever unit caught his fancy on the road south. Weapon production was moving at a brisk pace. After all, they had experienced workers and mature processes. Simply switching materials was a simple matter. Meanwhile, the expansion of the glass factory on Lake Hart Island was also successfully completed. The automated beer bottle production line, enhanced by stainless steel molds, produced crystal-clear glass bottles of excellent quality. And finally, there was the much-anticipated brewery. The reinforced concrete factory buildings were incredibly sturdy, and the production lines inside were being assembled around the clock. Because the equipment was too large to be transported whole by train, it had to be dismantled into parts, hauled to the factory trip after trip by tractor, and then painstakingly reassembled by the workers, piece by piece, like building blocks. The fermentation tanks, in particular, some of which were as large as small hills, had their materials brought directly to the factory and were fabricated on site. After months of hard work, at the beginning of August, the complete beer production line, integrating malt crushing, mashing, fermentation, bottling, capping, cleaning, and sterilization, was finally declared complete. The factory manager, deputy manager, financial staff, and workers, everyone quickly fell into place. In mid-August, the first trial batch of beer officially rolled off the line. The golden liquid, the pure white foam, and the satisfying hiss of an opened bottle heralded the dawn of the Han tribe's happy water era. As the days ticked by and September approached, the date of the southern migration grew ever closer. At Luo Chong's home, the monumental task of moving began. Jianing was already on bad terms with her family, so she certainly wouldn't be bringing that bunch of zealot relatives along. But Xiao Dai's mother, Shang, was a person of special concern to Luo Chong. This mother-in-law, who had made immense contributions to the Han tribe's textile industry, finally agreed to go south with them after much coaxing from Xiao Dai. And so, the moving party gained another elder and her few old friends who couldn't bear to be parted from her. Luo Chong himself didn't have much to pack, aside from a few industrial collectibles and some changes of clothes. It was the children's belongings that were piled up like a small mountain. Xiao Cheng's treasured model train set, in particular, caused a world-shattering tantrum when it was dismantled. The little boy only tearfully agreed after Luo Chong promised to build him a much longer track at their new home. At the docks in Luoyang County, a dozen massive sailing ships were already prepared and waiting, among them 6 large flying fish-fast ships. Luo Chong's family, along with their accompanying guards and luggage, would occupy 2 of the flying fish ships. The Divine Strategy Guard would also dispatch a battalion to escort them the entire way. They were not just bodyguards. Upon arriving in the south, they would become instructors, responsible for training the local garrisons and helping the Han tribe's military achieve full firearm adoption as quickly as possible. The remaining ships were filled with the first batch of kindling that Luo Chong had carefully selected for southern industry. Technical experts from every field, including mining, coking, steelmaking, and mechanics. They would be the pioneers who would usher in the era of the Great Southern Development. The September wind already carried a hint of coolness. Luo Chong remained seated calmly in his study, handling the last of his official duties. Xiao Dai and Jianing, meanwhile, led the maids in carrying the packed luggage, box by box, to the docks. A migration spanning 1,000 miles, a strategic shift that would determine the future of the empire, was about to begin. That brand new beer bottling line was yet another testament to the Han tribe's mechanical genius. You see, the biggest challenge when bottling beer is foam. That stuff is like a teenager's hormones. Explosive on contact, impossible to contain. If foam fills the bottle halfway, the beer overflows, which is both wasteful and creates a significant number of rejected products. To solve this hot-tempered problem, The tech geeks at the Research Institute nearly went bald, but they finally devised an elegant solution. They invented a dual-chamber valve. Simply put, they added a small, fixed-volume chamber between the pipe and the bottle opening. The volume of this chamber was precisely set to 560 milliliters, the net content of one bottle of beer. During filling, the machine would first fill this small chamber with beer. Then, one valve would close as the lower one opened, and swoosh. Exactly 560 milliliters of beer, no more, no less, would flow into the bottle. But just getting the quantity right wasn't enough. They also had to prevent foaming. So, they added a long, thin tube to the filling nozzle. As soon as an empty bottle was in place, this tube would zip straight to the bottom before gently starting to release the beer. Once the bottle was full, the tube would slowly retract. Throughout the entire process, the liquid barely touched the air, so the foam naturally had no cause to form. Even if a few mischievous bubbles did appear, the reserved space in the bottleneck was more than enough for them to settle, guaranteeing no overflow. The filled beer bottles, lined up in a proud procession, then marched on to the next station, the capping area. The speed here was even faster. Ka-chunk, 1 per second. The dark brown glass bottles, paired with pure black tinplate caps, gave off a distinct air of quality. Of course, it wasn't over yet. The sealed beer still had to pass 2 strict quality control checks. First, a leak test. A quality inspector, as stern as a headmaster, checked each one. Those that passed got a white snowflake pattern stamped onto the black cap with a resounding thwack. This wasn't ordinary ink, it was white paint. Second, a check for impurities inside the bottle. The beers that passed the first test were sent down a corridor of light, lined with carbide lamps. The inspectors, their eyes as sharp as X-ray machines, scanned every single bottle that passed before the lights. Once confirmed to be clear, a colorful trademark label was affixed to the bottle's body. So, the snowflake on the cap and the label on the bottle weren't just for branding. They were 2 medals of honor, signifying that the product had passed quality control.